History is by nature deeply related to storytelling. As much as we'd like to make history a science, we'll never get far away from the bonfire when you tell a story so that everyone else can remember it for the future. Whether, like me, you teach history by trade or you're just a history enthusiast, you'll always find yourself telling stories. It is only natural that every time you tell them, you want people to truly listen, to love them, to get a passion for them, even maybe to do their own research, so you'll be able to talk about it more at a later time. Some of us have a natural predisposition for history. We just love it as it is. We love the dramatic stories of greatness and darkness, and we love the spreadsheet stuff. We love the logistics, we love the numbers, the economy, the grimy details of war. But if you want to tell a story, you cannot tell it to yourself. For this reason, I would like to share with you my tips to become a better storyteller. Of course, specifically related to history, but it can be applied to anything. And since I am a rambler, in order to give ourselves some structure, I have made it into a numbered list. A YouTube numbered list. So without further ado, here are my 8 tips to become a better storyteller. Beginning with number 1, the anchor. Every great story has a protagonist, and in history sometimes you are just handed one. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon. But oftentimes, if you're trying to talk about something a little more complex or outside of the great stories of history, you will have to find your anchor yourself. Now, why do you need one? If we're telling the story of the First World War, do we need an anchor? Well, for people to listen to you and not lose themselves, they need a line to follow. They are gonna need a beginning, a middle, and an end. And for it to exist, a protagonist needs to be there. Now, the protagonist doesn't need to be a person. It just needs to be an anchor. A very compelling story can be told using the florin, the coin from Florence, Italy, used between the 13th and the 16th century, as a protagonist. But in order to do so, you need to treat the florin exactly as you would Julius Caesar. It needs to be introduced as some kind of heroic figure, you could say. After all, look at my nickname, it's the Plutarchian. I follow Plutarch in this. And Plutarch uses lives to explain history and morality, but we're just doing history. So the florin needs to be treated as a person, giving it a beginning. It comes from something. It is useful for a reason. It has been grown probably by people, so we can find people inside of the concept or things to keep it relatable to the person we're telling the story. Then again, we can find ourselves in the opposite problem. We want to tell a larger story. We want to tell the story of the Roman civil wars, for example. And this story is longer than any life. So, even if Julius Caesar is in the middle of it, can we use Julius Caesar as an anchor? Of course we can, but we need to use Caesar as a concept. So now we're looking for Caesar before and after. We find Caesar in Marius, who was related to him by marriage, and we find Caesar after in Augustus, related to him by adoption, family, and by the fact that Augustus rose to power using Caesar's name. So our story will end with the consequence of Caesar and begin with what made Caesar Caesar. By working your anchor around, you can tell stories that span centuries, keeping them deeply related to a character or to a concept treated like a character. Meaning people are gonna be able to follow and even get some passion for the story, in a very Game of Thronesy kind of way. This leads us to number 2, the flaw. Our protagonist needs to have a clear flaw that hints at the tragic end. And there always will be some kind of tragic end, even in glorious and positive stories. Something is gonna go wrong. And you need to give a hint to people from the beginning with the flaw, so that they kinda can look at the end and see from where we began and how we got here. So with Julius Caesar, or Pompey, it's very clear. It's character flaws. Julius Caesar is reckless, he acts before he thinks, and often this bites him back, and it will lead him to his death when combined with his weird mercy. Only given to Romans, of course, but still, he uses mercy in a very weird way for Romans. He doesn't kill his enemies, at least the first time they fight him. Pompey, of course, has his need to be approved by people he respects. He has it from the beginning of his life. It literally underlines his entrance in history when he meets Sulla, and it is a through line we can follow to his inevitable demise. Now, when you move away from characters and people, now you have a little bit of a problem. What is the flaw in a concept? What is the flaw in the florin? The flaw of a coin. This is where your ability as a storyteller begins to show to people. You won't be just given the flaw, so you need to work it into the story. In order to do so, we start from the ending. We find out why the florin stopped being the main coin used in Europe. It was supplanted by the Venetian ducat. Why? Because the ducat was more stable, made trustworthy by the Mediterranean trade dominated by the Venetian Republic. So Florence didn't have a real-world economic push to maintain stability enough. Why? Because the coin had become more of a financial tool. It was used everywhere, so its own success without a stable basis, like the ducat had, created the mechanism of its end. Now, is this exaggerated? Of course it is. Every coinage has its end, every mechanism of trade changes with the time. There are a lot of factors at work here, right? But you do not get someone passionate about something like a coin by talking about the deep and extremely complex structures working around it. You need a story, you need a protagonist, you need a flaw. And so sometimes we bend history to our story, just a little bit. Always telling the truth, but avoiding getting bogged down by it. So with our anchor completed by its flaw, we now move on to number 3, the opposition. History is not a book. It's not clear. Even Julius Caesar, who had a very clear story because it became a narrative in time, well, even Caesar doesn't have a clear enemy. Who's the enemy of Caesar? Is it Pompey? Well, not always. Is it Crassus? Is it Claudius? Maybe Cato, who really hated him? It's a lot of people. This becomes even worse when we're talking about something more metaphorical or more, well, material, like the florin. Who is the opposition of the florin? This is another situation where we bend history to our story a little bit. When you tell the story of Julius Caesar, you take all of these characters into consideration. They are important, they are interesting, but you make one of them the opposition. The opposition has the time to flourish in your story. It has the time to become something the person listening to you recognizes. So for Caesar, maybe we can work with Pompey, because Pompey has the climactic battle at the end. It is the classical choice, but we can also work with Cato, the Stoic martyr. Cato, who fights Caesar in the Senate, Cato, who is there to nag Pompey into the climactic battle, more of a background enemy who pushes others in front of Caesar and finally, in the end, tragically takes his own life when he is unable to destroy Caesar. The opposition doesn't need to get to the end of the story. It just needs to be there for people to have a protagonist and an antagonist. Now, going back to the florin, our opposition becomes more complicated. It can be the economic system trying to reject a new order of coinage, personified maybe by one of the great kings who ruled one of the most prosperous countries at the time. It can even be something that could happen. As far as the florin goes, we can go to the Bardi family of Florence. In the 14th century, they loaned a significant amount of money to King Edward III, who failed to repay them. By doing so, the king caused the fall and bankruptcy of the Bardi family and a financial crisis across Europe. From this moment, banking families began to use a new standard operating procedure, which was not to lend too much to a single subject, because you would be then dependent on that subject. And with kings going around, they could just not pay you. Such a risk, the possibility of such a situation, can be used in a story as the opposition to the coin itself. Because the coin is not just a coin, the coin is the stable era in which the coin is dominant. And how was this stable era? This brings us to number 4, the normal. Everyone likes to hear about battles, incredible moments of sacrifice, things you're going to remember for the rest of your life, but what really makes it sink in is making it relatable. Around this moment, there's the day-to-day. Julius Caesar didn't just conquer Gaul in a blaze of glory, he was there for years, doing normal things, with his men doing normal things. So, you sprinkle it in. Every time you tell a story, you keep bringing it back to the normal. Julius Caesar moves around in Rome, so how was Rome at the time? Julius Caesar marches to Gaul. How is it traveling at the time? What's the food situation? There's no need to go into long-winded details, just a little bit. It's going to make a big difference in making Julius Caesar less of a mythical figure and more of a person you want people to relate to. This is one thing that it's even easier to do with a concept like the florin. You just talk about normal life, how it was used, so we're not gonna dwell on that too much. But when things aren't normal, we get to number 5, glory or tragedy. The answer to the question is of course both. You want both glory and tragedy in your story, but you need to structure it so that one is the main goal of your story. Do you want a glorious story that is going to make people think of the anchor as one of the greats, or do you want a tragic story that is gonna make people relate to the anchor? Once you have made the choice, you need to sprinkle the opposite. There's a very good example in the story of Sulla. After Sulla won and conquered Rome and was the greatest man in Rome for a long time, he decided to let power go. A glorious story of victory, right? But then he dies horribly of illness in his villa, paying the price of what he did to get there. Now, of course, I'm not saying to make up anything, which is something that might have been done in this case, we don't know. But what I'm saying is that you could tell the story of Sulla without saying he died in horrible pain at the end of his life after letting power go. You can keep it glorious if you want. But sprinkling that bit of tragedy at the end, well, it gives a little bit of realism to the thing, right? It makes it better. It makes the character of Sulla more relatable to the person you're telling the story to, because he is not just some kind of god far away, he has a tragic ending even at the end of his glory. Because glory is not something you get and then you keep. Now, when you work with a harder subject, like the florin, this is a lot harder. You need to work in characters to do so. You need people that pay the price of the fall of the florin. You need people that gather a large amount of money when the florin is flowing. Maybe you need a family you follow in glory and tragedy. Finding people in stories, even when they are about complex economical subjects, is the best way to have anyone listen to you when you talk. And in order to keep them listening, we get to number 6, the labyrinth. You need to choose your battles. We already hinted at this, but details are both a great thing, are what history is made of, and the greatest enemy of the storyteller. The more details you go into, the more you will lose your audience. The more details you go into, the more you are going to be pandering to some and losing others. So you need to choose your battles. You need to find the place for details and make them easily digestible. Details in a story are always accepted and desired when they truly explain something. Details should never be longer than the story part itself that they are explaining. So if you are telling the story of Julius Caesar, you're gonna spend some time telling how Caesar grew up or how Marius paved the way, and then you're gonna spend some time talking about the details of the Marian reforms and how they influenced Roman culture, paving the way for Caesar, but keep the times similar. Talk about Marius as much as you talk about the reforms. Keep the characters into the details, so when you're talking about specific things of economic structures during the Florin era, you keep the Florin families into the mix. You talk about them as much as you talk about numbers and statistics and inflation and so on. These of course are not hard rules. The more capable you are, the more you can break them. But in general, they will help you keep out of the labyrinth. So if I have to choose my battles with details to avoid getting into the labyrinth, where do I put them? I put them in number 7, the brilliance. The brilliance is the climax of the story. It can be a very direct climax, like a large battle, like the confrontation between Caesar and Pompey, or the epicness of the Battle of Plataea. But it can be forced into weird places by the fact that history doesn't necessarily always have a climactic moment. The Great War between Sulla and Marius doesn't end with a climactic battle. Marius just dies before Sulla can even reach him. And what of our beloved Florin? There's no climactic battle there. That is why I decided to call it the brilliance. The brilliance would be what makes our protagonist, our anchor, brilliant. What makes it worthy of our story? Why are we telling this story? Through the brilliance, through this moment, we go into details. With Caesar, we go into details about his tactical genius, his quick decision-making, what makes him so great. Well, we tell that story by telling the details about the climactic battle between him and Pompey. With the Florin, this is the moment in which we go into details about how it worked so well, why it was embraced so much. We answer questions, that is our climax for a more complex topic. And we position this explanation in a similar way to how we would position a climactic battle if there was one, which is around 3/4 of our story. We want the time to land the story after, but we don't want to do it too soon. So avoid the labyrinth and then put all of your details and all of your love for small things, for what makes history history, in the moment of brilliance. Remember, the attention of a person is an economic thing. It's not infinite. You can spend too much of it. That is why we avoid the labyrinth on the rest of the story, and we try to spend that attention on the brilliance. And the attention is going to be kept because the brilliance is related to the anchor, and in a way, to the opposition, the flaw, everything else. And finally, we will get to what makes history history. The story. In order to really get people, we need to bring our sources to bear. We need to let them know how we know this. We need to let them know how they can know this. And in my experience, the best way is to create doubt. Because we don't know anything about history without doubt. Because we are always reading what other people are writing. We are interpreting what they left us in the archaeological record, or, well, in more modern times with anything we find that cannot be yet classified as archaeological. So at the end of our story, we put some doubt in the story itself. How? The best way, usually, especially with ancient history, is to talk about the writer. Who talked about this, who wrote about this, and why. Plutarch wanted to tell a story, wanted to teach us something, so he probably manipulated all of the stories of people he wrote about, from Alexander the Great to Julius Caesar. People writing right after a controversial emperor in the Roman Empire, well, they were noble people who were probably slighted by that emperor, and so they started piling up accusation after accusation. Every emperor becomes a sexual deviant if he wasn't nice to the senators. So, by presenting your sources and putting a little bit of your story into question, by planting the seed of doubt, you are not only giving the story itself more resonance, since the people listening to you are going to question it a little bit and think about it, you are also giving the other person the tools they need to start asking questions themselves. If the story you're telling is potentially in doubt, and could potentially always be in doubt, well, that is a fun place to put your theories, right? To start thinking, to start asking questions. And asking questions is the beginning of a passion for something. And that, well, I say it after I already told, is number 8, the doubt. Now, of course, all of this was just my opinion, my way of doing things, and, well, I am a rambler by nature, so let me know what you think. I hope this can help you in your, well, history telling, but also I do believe it can be applied to anything, from talking with friends to a job application. Because in the end, the greatest story we're all going to tell is our own. Have a good one.